Sometimes the loneliest people understand suffering better than anyone else. And sometimes one simple choice to stop when everyone else keeps driving can change two lives forever. On a quiet back road outside Pine Ridge, Tennessee, 57-year-old Clay Harmon found a wounded German shepherd caught in a rusted trap. Cars had passed by all morning. People looked and kept going. But Clay stopped. He was divorced, worn down by life, and hadn't felt needed in years. When he knelt down and reached out his hand to that scared, hurting animal, something shifted. He decided to help. He brought the dog home, nursed him back to health, and named him Ranger. What Clay didn't expect was how much saving this dog would save him too. Would this be the second chance they both needed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clay Harmon woke each morning to silence. Not the peaceful kind that comes with contentment, but the heavy silence of a house that had forgotten how to be a home. The rental on Maple Street was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 70s, and a garage he rarely opened. He'd moved in 3 years ago, after the divorce, choosing the place because it was cheap and because nobody he knew lived nearby. The wedding band sat in the top drawer of his nightstand. He hadn't worn it since the day Linda handed him the papers, but he couldn't quite bring himself to throw it away either. Some mornings he'd open the drawer, look at it sitting there on a folded handkerchief, and close it again without touching it. It was easier than deciding what it meant that he still kept it. His daughter Amber had called it giving up when he'd rented this place. She'd wanted him to fight for the house, to argue with Linda, to show some fire. But Clay had been too tired for fire. He'd signed everything Linda's lawyer put in front of him and moved his belongings in a single trip with a borrowed truck. Amber hadn't spoken to him for 6 months after that. Even now, their conversations were brief and careful, like 2 people walking on ice that might crack. At 57, Clay worked maintenance at the Pine Ridge Community Center, a job that paid enough to cover rent and groceries but not much else. He fixed leaky faucets, replaced light bulbs, patched drywall, and kept the building running. Frank Benson, his boss, was a gruff man in his 60s with a grey beard and a habit of chewing on toothpicks. Frank didn't talk much, which suited Clay fine. They worked together in comfortable silence most days. The job was nothing like what Clay used to do. For 20 years he'd been a carpenter, a good one. He'd built custom cabinets, restored antique furniture, and took pride in work that would outlast him. But when the economy shifted and the steady jobs dried up, he'd taken the maintenance position. For the insurance and the reliable paycheck, he'd told himself it was temporary. That was 11 years ago. His neighbor, Doris Kellerman, was a widow in her 70s who lived in the house to his left. She'd lost her husband 2 years before Clay moved in, and she had a habit of appearing on his porch with covered dishes and gentle conversation. Clay suspected she was lonely too, though she hid it better than he did. She talked about her grandchildren, her garden, and the weather. He listened, fixed things when she asked, and tried to be the kind of neighbor she deserved. "You're too young to live like an old man," she'd told him once, standing in his doorway with a container of soup. Clay had smiled and thanked her for the soup, but he didn't know how to explain that he didn't feel young anymore. He felt like someone who'd misplaced something important and couldn't remember where he'd left it. Most evenings, he'd eat dinner in front of the television, some reheated meal or a sandwich, and then sit on the porch until the mosquitoes drove him inside. He'd watch the neighbors come and go, hear the sounds of families eating dinner together, children laughing in backyards. It was like watching life through a window he couldn't quite reach. Amber lived in Georgia now with her son, Wyatt, Clay's grandson, 7 years old and growing up 2 states away. Clay had seen him 3 times, once when he was born, once at a birthday party when he turned 3, and once last Christmas when Amber had driven up for a day. Wyatt was shy around him, which hurt in a way Clay couldn't quite name. He was a stranger to his own grandson. The phone calls with Amber were stilted. She'd ask how he was doing. He'd say fine. She'd talk about Wyatt, about her job managing a medical office, about being tired. He'd listen and try to think of something helpful to say. Usually, he couldn't. The conversations would end with promises to talk soon, and then weeks would pass before either of them called again. Pine Ridge was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, or at least knew of them. Population just under 4,000. 1 main street with a hardware store, a diner, a post office, and a handful of other businesses that had been there for decades. The community center where Clay worked sat at the edge of town, a low brick building that hosted everything from senior yoga classes to kids' basketball leagues. Clay had grown up in a town like this, 3 hours west. His father had been a carpenter too, and had taught him the trade in their garage workshop. Clay remembered the smell of sawdust, the weight of tools in his hands, his father's patient voice explaining how to read the grain of wood, how to measure twice and cut once. Those had been good years, simple years. He'd married Linda when he was 23. She'd been a teacher at the elementary school, patient and kind, with a laugh that could fill a room. They'd had Amber 2 years later. For a long time, life had felt complete. But somewhere along the way, Clay still wasn't sure exactly when, they'd started drifting. Conversations became shorter. Silences became longer. By the time Amber left for college, there wasn't much left holding them together except habit. Linda had been the one to say it out loud. "We're not happy, Clay. Haven't been for a long time." He couldn't argue with her. The divorce had been quick and quiet. No fighting, no drama. Just 2 people agreeing that whatever they'd had was gone. Linda had remarried last year, a pharmacist named Gregory, who seemed nice enough. Clay had heard about it from Doris, who'd heard about it from someone at church. The garage behind Clay's rental was full of his old tools. Table saw, drill press, hand planes, chisels, all collecting dust under tarps. He'd opened the garage door once since moving in, looked at everything for a long moment, and closed it again. It felt like looking at artifacts from someone else's life. On the Tuesday that changed everything, Clay left work at 4:30, the same as always. Frank had nodded to him on his way out. "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow," Clay had replied. But instead of taking his usual route home, straight down Highway 41, Clay had turned onto Old Mill Road. He couldn't have said why. Restlessness, maybe. Or just the need to delay arriving at the empty house for a few more minutes. The road was narrow and winding, cutting through farmland and patches of woods. He'd driven it before, years ago, but not recently. The late afternoon sun slanted through the trees, and Clay had the windows down, letting the warm air blow through the truck. The radio played something he didn't recognize. His mind wandered to nothing in particular. What he'd eat for dinner, whether he needed to stop for milk, the sound the center's boiler was making that he'd need to check tomorrow. He almost didn't see it, just a dark shape in the ditch up ahead. But something made him slow down, made him look closer. That's when he saw the dog. Clay pulled the truck onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. His hands remained on the steering wheel for a moment, his heart beating harder than it should. The dog lay about 20 feet away, partially hidden in the tall grass of the drainage ditch. Even from the truck, Clay could see it wasn't moving much, just the slight rise and fall of labored breathing. He turned off the engine and sat there, staring. The rational part of his brain was already making arguments. It could be dangerous. The dog might bite. Animal control should handle this. He should call someone, keep driving. But he thought about the tire tracks in the dust. Fresh ones. Other people had stopped, looked, and decided to keep going. How many? 3 cars? 5. He wondered what they'd told themselves to make it okay. Clay opened the door and stepped out. The heat hit him immediately. That thick, humid Tennessee heat that made everything feel slower. Cicadas buzzed in the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor engine rumbled. Clay walked toward the ditch, his work boots careful on the uneven ground. The German shepherd lifted its head as Clay approached. The dog's eyes were dark and frightened, lips pulled back to show teeth. A low growl rumbled from its chest. Clay stopped moving. "Easy there," he said softly. "Easy, boy." The dog's right front leg was caught in a rusted steel trap, the kind used for catching coyotes or foxes. Old and illegal now, but still occasionally found in rural areas. Blood matted the fur around the trap. The dog had clearly been there for hours, maybe longer. Its tongue lolled out, dry and pale. Dehydration. Probably heat stroke, too. Clay looked back at his truck, then at the dog again. The animal watched him with a mix of fear and something else. Pain. Exhaustion. Maybe a flicker of hope that someone would finally help. "I'm going to get you out of there," Clay said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or himself. "Just stay calm." He walked back to the truck and grabbed the water bottle from the cup holder. He kept a toolbox behind the seat, basic stuff for emergencies. He pulled that out too, along with an old blanket he used to protect the truck bed when hauling supplies. When he returned to the ditch, the dog was still growling, but weaker now. Clay knelt about 6 feet away, moving slowly. He unscrewed the water bottle and poured some into his cupped hand, extending it toward the dog. "Thirsty?" he asked quietly. The dog's nose twitched. Its eyes moved from Clay's face to his hand and back again. The growling stopped. After a long moment, the dog stretched its neck forward and lapped at the water in Clay's palm. The tongue was rough and desperate. "That's it," Clay murmured. "That's good." He poured more water, let the dog drink again. Then he set the bottle down and opened the toolbox. He'd need something to pry the trap open. A screwdriver, maybe, or a pry bar. He found a large flathead screwdriver and a pair of pliers. "I'm going to touch the trap now," Clay said, keeping his voice steady and low. "It's going to hurt for a second when it releases, but then you'll be free. Understand?" The dog watched him, panting. Clay moved closer, inch by inch. The dog tensed but didn't snap. Clay could see the animal was beyond fighting, too exhausted, too hurt. He examined the trap mechanism, spring-loaded, rusted shut. He'd need to wedge the jaws apart carefully. He positioned the screwdriver between the trap's jaws and pushed down on the handle, using it as a lever. The metal groaned. The dog whimpered. Clay's hands were shaking. "Almost there," he whispered. "Almost." The trap released with a sharp click. The dog yelped and jerked its leg free, scrambling backward. Clay fell back on his heels, giving the animal space. The dog tried to stand, but collapsed, the injured leg unable to bear weight. Clay spread the blanket on the ground and moved closer, again, hands open and visible. "Let me help you. Please." The dog's eyes met his, really met his this time. Something passed between them. An understanding, maybe, or just mutual exhaustion. Clay slid his arms under the dog's body, feeling ribs too prominent under the fur, and lifted. The animal was heavy, maybe 70 pounds, but Clay managed. The dog didn't fight. It laid its head against Clay's chest, breathing hard. Clay carried the dog to his truck and settled it carefully in the passenger seat on top of the blanket. The dog's eyes were already closing. Clay grabbed his phone and searched for the nearest veterinarian. Dr. Phyllis Brennan's clinic was 7 miles away in town. He called as he started driving. "Pine Ridge Animal Care," a woman's voice answered. "I found a dog caught in a trap," Clay said, the words tumbling out. "He's hurt bad, dehydrated. I'm bringing him in now. We close at 5:30. "Please," Clay interrupted. "He needs help." There was a pause. Then, "Bring him in. We'll wait." The drive back to town felt longer than it was. Clay kept glancing at the dog, checking to make sure it was still breathing. The animal's eyes would flutter open occasionally, look at Clay, then close again. "Stay with me," Clay said. "We're almost there." Dr. Brennan was waiting at the clinic door when Clay pulled up. She was a woman in her early 60s, grey hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing scrubs and an expression of professional concern. She helped Clay carry the dog inside and onto an examination table in the treatment room. "How long was he in the trap?" she asked, already examining the injured leg. "I don't know. Hours at least. Maybe since last night." Dr. Brennan worked quickly, checking vital signs, examining the wounds. "Severe dehydration. This leg is infected. I'll need to clean and treat it. Possible fracture. Some older scars here on his body, too." She looked up at Clay. This dog has been through more than just the trap. Clay felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "These marks, these are consistent with fighting. Dog fighting." She pointed to scars along the dog's shoulders and neck. "See these? Bite marks. Old ones." Clay stared at the scars he hadn't noticed before. "Who would do that?" "People who shouldn't be allowed near animals," Dr. Brennan said grimly. She started an IV line. "I can treat him, but it'll cost around $800. Maybe more, depending on what we find. Do you want to surrender him to animal control? They might be able to help with costs." Clay looked at the dog lying on the table. The animal's eyes were open now, watching him with that same exhausted trust from the ditch. "No," Clay heard himself say. "I'll pay. I'll take care of him." Dr. Brennan studied Clay's face for a moment, then nodded. "All right, then. Let me get to work. This'll take a couple hours. You can wait in the lobby if you want." But Clay stayed, standing by the table, one hand resting near the dog's head. He didn't know why he'd said yes, didn't know where the money would come from or what he'd do with a dog in his small rental. All he knew was that he'd stopped when others hadn't. And now he couldn't walk away. The dog's tail twitched, just once, barely a movement. But Clay saw it. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "I promise." Clay brought the dog home just after 8 that evening. Dr. Brennan had cleaned and bandaged the leg, administered antibiotics and pain medication, and given Clay a list of instructions that felt overwhelming. The bill had been $763. Clay had put it on his credit card and tried not to think about how he'd pay it off. The dog lay across the passenger seat during the drive home, sedated but conscious. Clay had stopped at the store for supplies, dog food, bowls, a cushion that would serve as a bed. He'd stood in the pet aisle feeling lost, grabbing things that seemed necessary. Inside the rental house, Clay cleared a space in the living room and arranged the cushion near the couch. He carried the dog inside, moving carefully, and settled him on the makeshift bed. The animal's eyes opened briefly, then closed again. Clay sat on the couch and watched the dog breathe. The house felt different with another living thing in it. Less empty, somehow. He realized he hadn't shared his space with anyone since the divorce. Not even overnight guests. It had been 3 years of complete solitude. Need to call you something, Clay said quietly. The dog's ear twitched at the sound of his voice. Clay thought about it, running through names in his head. Nothing felt right until he thought of the old park rangers he'd met on camping trips as a kid. Steady, reliable men who protected things worth protecting. Ranger, he said. That's a good name. The dog's tail moved slightly against the cushion. Clay spent that first night on the couch, a blanket pulled over his legs, waking every hour to check on Ranger. Each time he'd reach down and rest his hand near the dog's side, feeling the rise and fall of breathing, making sure everything was okay. It reminded him of when Amber was a baby, those anxious nights of new fatherhood. Morning came too early. Clay called Frank before his shift started. I need to take a few days off, Clay said, the word strange in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd asked for time off. You sick? Frank asked. No. I found a dog yesterday. Injured. Needs care for a few days. There was a pause on the line. Then Frank said, Take what you need. We'll manage. Thanks, Frank. Clay, good for you for doing that. The first week was harder than Clay expected. Ranger wouldn't eat unless Clay sat right next to him, hand near the bowl. The dog flinched at sudden movements, tensed when Clay reached for him. Trust had to be earned slowly, in small increments. Clay administered the medications on schedule, changed the bandages twice a day, talked constantly in that low, calm voice. He told Ranger about his day, even though there wasn't much to tell. He talked about the weather, about the neighbor's cat that visited the porch, about nothing and everything. I had a dog when I was a kid, Clay said on the third day, sitting on the floor near Ranger's bed. His name was Duke, big yellow lab. My dad brought him home as a puppy, said every boy needs a dog. He was right about that. Ranger's eyes were open, watching Clay's face. Duke lived 14 years, died when I was in my 20s, already married to Linda. I cried like a child. Linda held me and didn't say anything, just let me cry. Clay paused, surprised by the memory. He hadn't thought about Duke in years. Haven't had a dog since. Told myself I was too busy, but that wasn't really true. On the fourth day, Doris knocked on the door with a casserole dish. Clay let her in, and she stopped when she saw Ranger. Well now, she said softly. Who's this? Found him caught in a trap on Old Mill Road. Name's Ranger. Doris set the casserole on the kitchen counter and knelt slowly near the dog, careful not to crowd him. Poor thing's been through something, hasn't he? More than I knew when I picked him up. She looked at Clay then, really looked at him. You know what I see different about you? You're here, really here. First time in 3 years. Clay didn't know what to say to that. Doris patted his arm and left the casserole with instructions to eat properly, not just feed the dog and forget himself. When Amber called that weekend, Clay almost didn't answer. Their conversations had been so stilted lately, but he picked up on the third ring. Hey, Dad. Hey, sweetheart. Just checking in. How are you? Clay looked at Ranger, who was watching him from the cushion. I'm okay. Actually, something happened this week. I found a dog. He told her the story, the trap, the rescue, Dr. Brennan, the decision to keep him. Amber was quiet on the other end. Dad, are you sure that's a good idea? You can barely take care of yourself. The words stung, probably because there was truth in them, but Clay kept his voice steady. I'm trying, Amber. That's all I can do. Another pause, then softer. I know. I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. They talked a little longer. Amber told him about Wyatt, about soccer practice and homework struggles. Clay listened and asked questions, feeling like maybe they were actually talking for the first time in months. Maybe we could visit sometime, Amber said before hanging up. "Wyatt should meet his grandfather properly, and this dog of yours." "I'd like that." After the call, Clay felt lighter somehow. He returned to the living room and sat on the floor next to Ranger's bed. The dog had been eating better, taking short walks in the backyard, slowly healing. But he still wouldn't let Clay touch him, beyond what was necessary for medical care. "We're both pretty beat up, aren't we?" Clay said. "Both been hurt. Both don't trust easy anymore." He extended his hand, palm up, and left it there between them. An offering, an invitation. Ranger looked at the hand, then at Clay's face. After a long moment, the dog stretched his neck forward and sniffed Clay's fingers. Then Ranger laid his head down, his nose resting against Clay's palm. Clay felt his throat tighten. He stayed perfectly still, afraid to move and break the moment. They sat like that for a long time, man and dog, both learning what it meant to trust again. That night, Clay went out to the garage for the first time since moving in. He pulled the tarp off his old tools, dust floating in the air. He found the leather leash hanging on a nail, the one from Duke, saved all these years. He wiped it clean with a rag and brought it inside. The next morning, Clay clipped the leash to Ranger's collar for the first time. The dog stood unsteadily, testing the injured leg. "Just around the yard," Clay said. "Small steps." They walked slowly, Ranger limping but managing. The morning sun was warm, birds singing in the trees. Clay looked down at the dog beside him and realized he was smiling. It was the first real smile he'd had in longer than he could remember. 2 weeks after the rescue, Clay returned to work part-time. He brought Ranger with him, unable to leave the dog alone for 8 hours. Frank took one look at the German shepherd, limping beside Clay, and nodded his approval. "Keep him out of the way of the classes and we're fine," Frank said. Clay set up a spot for Ranger in the maintenance office, a small room with a desk, filing cabinets, and shelves of cleaning supplies. He brought the cushion from home and a bowl of water. Ranger settled into the space like he'd always been there. The community center regulars noticed immediately. Irving Walsh, a postal worker who came for the lunchtime walking group, stopped by the office during his break. "Heard you got yourself a dog," Irving said, leaning against the doorframe. He was a lean man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a perpetual sunburn from his mail route. "Found him, more like," Clay said. He was in bad shape. Irving watched Ranger for a moment. "German shepherd. Good breed. Loyal." He paused. "You hear about the trouble over in Hartwell County? Dog fighting ring they busted last month?" Clay's attention sharpened. "No, I hadn't heard." "Yeah, nasty business. Sheriff's department found about 15 dogs, most of them in terrible condition. Some didn't make it." Irving shook his head. "Makes you wonder how people can be so cruel." After Irving left, Clay sat at his desk and stared at Ranger. The scars Dr. Brennan had pointed out seemed more prominent now that he knew what to look for. He thought about what Irving had said, dog-fighting rings in neighboring counties. How far did Ranger travel to end up in that trap? Where had he come from? That evening, Clay found himself in the garage again. Not just looking this time, but actually working. He cleared space on the old workbench, organized his tools, swept the floor. His hands remembered the motions, the way to hold a plane, the proper grip for a chisel. He started with something simple, a bird feeder. Just a small project to see if he still could. The wood was scrap pine he'd saved from a project years ago. He measured, cut, sanded. Ranger lay on a folded blanket nearby, watching. "Used to do this all the time," Clay said, fitting pieces together. "Built your grandmother a hope chest for our first anniversary. Took me 3 months, working nights after my regular job. She cried when I gave it to her. The work felt good. His muscles ached from disuse, but it was a satisfying ache. By midnight, he had a completed bird feeder, rough around the edges, but functional. He held it up for Ranger to see. Not bad for being out of practice. The next project was a small bench for the front porch, then a shelf for the bathroom. Each evening after work, Clay spent hours in the garage, and each evening Ranger was there with him. The dog's presence made the space feel less lonely, made the act of creating feel purposeful again. When Clay video called Amber the following Sunday, he turned the camera to show her the workshop. "Dad, are you building again?" She sounded surprised. "Just small things, keeping my hands busy." "That's good, really good." Her face softened on the screen. "Can I see Ranger?" Clay angled the phone toward the dog. Ranger lifted his head, ears perking at the sound of Amber's voice coming from the speaker. "He's beautiful, Dad. How's he doing?" "Better every day. Still skittish sometimes, but we're figuring each other out." Amber was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been thinking about what I said before, about you taking care of yourself. That wasn't fair. You're doing something good here. I'm trying, I know, and I should try too, to be better about staying in touch." She glanced off screen, then back. "Wyatt's asking about you, wants to know about the dog. Maybe we could visit next month, if that's okay?" Clay felt something warm spread through his chest. "I'd love that. Really." After they hung up, Clay sat in the garage with Ranger at his feet. He thought about Amber's words, about Wyatt asking about him. He tried to remember the last time he'd felt like someone's presence mattered. Like he mattered. At the community center, people started seeking Clay out. Beatrice Kimball, a retired teacher who volunteered at the front desk, brought treats for Ranger and stayed to chat. She talked about her garden, her book club, asked Clay about his woodworking. He found himself sharing more than he had in years. "You should teach a class," Beatrice suggested. "Basic carpentry. We're always looking for new programs." "I don't know about that." "Think about it. You've got a gift. Shame to keep it to yourself." Frank echoed the sentiment later that week. "Beatrice is right. You could teach. People would sign up." Clay deflected. But the idea stayed with him. Teaching meant being visible, being accountable to others. It meant stepping out of the comfortable isolation he'd built around himself. It was terrifying, but it was also tempting. One afternoon, Irving stopped by the maintenance office again. He looked troubled. "You remember what I said about dog fighting?" Irving asked. "I remember." "Been hearing more talk, not just Hartwell County, rumors about something operating closer, maybe in Whitman or Thorndale." He glanced at Ranger. "Just thought you should know, in case he came from something like that." After Irving left, Clay did something he hadn't planned on. He opened his laptop and started searching. Dog fighting rings in Tennessee. Signs of dog fighting. How dogs are used and abused in fighting operations. The information made him sick, but he kept reading. He learned about bait dogs, animals used to train fighting dogs, chosen because they're gentle or won't fight back. He learned about the scars they carry, the psychological damage, the fear that never quite leaves. He looked at Ranger, really looked at him. The scars, the wariness, the way he flinched at loud noises or sudden movements. "Someone did this to you on purpose," Clay said quietly. "Didn't they?" Ranger's ears went back, as if he understood the weight of the words. Clay made a decision then. He pulled out his phone and called Dr. Brennan. When she answered, he asked the question that had been building in his mind. The scars on Ranger. Could he have been a bait dog? Dr. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Yes, that would be consistent with what I saw. If I wanted to find out where he came from, report it, what would I do? Clay, these operations are dangerous. If he escaped from something like that, I know. But someone's still doing this to other dogs. Let me think about it. I might know someone who could help. Someone who deals with these situations. That night, Clay sat on his porch with Ranger beside him. For the first time in weeks, the dog rested his head on Clay's knee. Clay's hand settled on Ranger's neck, fingers scratching gently behind the ears. "We're going to figure this out," Clay murmured. "Find out what happened to you. Make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Ranger's tail thumped once against the porch boards. Clay looked out at the quiet street, the familiar houses, the predictable life he'd been living. Something had shifted. He wasn't just going through motions anymore. He had purpose, and it scared him as much as it energized him. Dr. Brennan called 3 days later with a name, Ingrid Sawyer. She ran an underground network that rescued dogs from fighting rings, worked with law enforcement when possible, and operated mostly on donations and sheer determination. "She's careful," Dr. Brennan warned. "She'll want to vet you before she shares anything. These people she goes after, they're not forgiving." Clay called the number that evening. A woman answered on the IV fourth ring, her voice guarded. "Who gave you this number?" "Dr. Phyllis Brennan in Pine Ridge. She said you might be able to help." "Help with what?" Clay explained about Ranger, the trap, the scars. He kept his voice steady, factual. When he finished, Ingrid was quiet for a long moment. "You understand what you're asking about. This isn't lost dogs finding their way home. This is organized cruelty. People who make money off suffering." "I understand." "Why do you care? You saved one dog. That's more than most people do." Clay looked at Ranger, who was watching him from the couch. "Because someone's still out there, hurting others. And I can't just pretend I don't know that." Another pause. Then, "Meet me Tuesday afternoon. 2 o'clock. Rosie's Diner off Highway 52. Come alone." The diner was 40 minutes away, in a town Clay had only passed through. He arrived early and took a booth near the back. At exactly 2 o'clock, a woman in her mid-40s walked in. She had short, dark hair streaked with grey, wore jeans and a faded jacket, and carried herself like someone who'd seen too much but refused to look away. She slid into the booth across from Clay without introducing herself. "You're Clay?" "Yes." "Show me pictures of the dog." Clay pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. Ranger on the day he'd brought him home, the injuries, the healing progress. Ingrid studied each one carefully. "Bait dog," she said quietly. "No question. See how the scars are all defensive? He wasn't trained to fight. He was used to make other dogs vicious." The words made Clay's stomach turn. Ingrid ordered coffee when the waitress came by. Clay did the same. Then Ingrid leaned forward, her voice low. "There's been activity in this region for about a year. We've tracked some of it. But these operations move around. They'll use a location for a few months, then abandon it before anyone can pin them down. Do you think Ranger came from one of these? Probably. The question is which one, and whether it's still operating." She paused. "I've been watching a property outside Pine Ridge. Old estate called the Halloran Place. You know it?" Clay shook his head. "It's about 15 miles from town. Been abandoned for years. But there's been activity lately. Vehicles coming and going at odd hours. Too much for a vacant property. You think they're using it?" "Maybe. But I need more information before I can move. That's where someone local could help." She studied Clay's face. "You understand the risk? If these people think you're watching them." "I understand." Ingrid reached into her jacket and pulled out a phone. a cheap burner, the kind you buy at gas stations. Use this to contact me. Never use your regular phone. Don't tell anyone what you're doing. Not friends, not family. No one. Clay took the phone, feeling its weight in his palm. Start simple, Ingrid said. Drive by the property at different times. Note any patterns, vehicles, people, anything unusual. Take photos if you can do it safely. Don't get close. Don't let them see you. They talked for another hour. Ingrid explained what to look for, how to stay safe, what to do if something went wrong. By the time Clay left the diner, his head was spinning with information and the reality of what he'd agreed to. The Halloran estate sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by overgrown fields and woods. Clay found it 2 days later, driving slowly past the entrance. He could see the main house in the distance, a once grand Victorian, now sagging and dark. Several outbuildings clustered behind it. He didn't stop, just noted the location and drove on. Over the next week, Clay developed a routine. He'd drive by at different times, early morning, afternoon, evening. Sometimes he saw nothing. Other times, there were vehicles parked near the outbuildings, trucks mostly, sometimes as many as 5 or 6. He started carrying his phone with the camera ready, taking photos as he passed. The pictures weren't great, too far away, too quick, but they showed the activity Ingrid had mentioned. Balancing this secret mission with his regular life felt surreal. At work, he fixed leaky faucets and replaced ceiling tiles. At home, he cooked dinner and played with Ranger. But in between, he was watching, documenting, gathering evidence of something dark he didn't fully understand yet. Frank noticed something was different. "You seem distracted lately," he said one afternoon as they were repairing a broken door hinge at the community center. "Just got a lot on my mind." "Anything I can help with?" Clay wanted to tell him, but Ingrid's warning echoed. "Tell no one." "Just adjusting to having Ranger around, making sure I'm doing right by him." Frank accepted the answer, but Clay could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. When Amber called to confirm their visit, 2 weeks away now, Clay felt a spike of anxiety. What if something happened before then? What if this investigation put him at risk and he wasn't there when his daughter and grandson arrived? But he couldn't stop. Every time he doubted himself, he looked at Ranger's scars and remembered there were other dogs still suffering. One evening, Clay went to the Pine Ridge Library. The librarian, Hugh Pritchard, was a thin man in his 70s who'd worked there for 40 years. He knew the history of every property in 3 counties. "I'm curious about the old Halloran estate," Clay said, trying to sound casual. "Drove past it the other day. Beautiful property, even in disrepair." Hugh's face lit up. "Oh, the Halloran place. That's a piece of history right there." He pulled out old property records, tax documents, even photographs from the library's archive. The estate had been built in 1887 by a railroad magnate. It had passed through several families before being abandoned in the 1970s. The ownership records after that were murky, sold multiple times, foreclosed on, purchased by an LLC with no clear connection to anyone local. "Shame what happened to it," Hugh said, showing Clay a photograph from the 1920s. The estate in its prime, gardens, manicured lawns, the house pristine. Used to be the jewel of the county. Clay studied the photograph, trying to reconcile it with the decaying property he'd been watching. Then he noticed something in the background, several large outbuildings, similar to what he'd seen on his drive-bys. "What were those used for?" he asked, pointing. "Stables mostly. The Hallorans bred horses, had quite the operation back in the day." Stables, large, isolated buildings perfect for hiding illegal activities. Clay thanked Hugh and left with copies of the photographs. That night, he sent them to Ingrid, along with his notes from the past week. She called the next day on the burner phone. "This is good work. The pattern you're seeing, vehicles on weekend nights, that matches fight schedules. They run events when there's less chance of interference. What happens now? Now we need to get closer. See what's actually happening on those nights." Her voice was serious. "Clay, this is where it gets dangerous. I can handle the close surveillance if you want to step back." Clay thought about it, about the easy option of handing everything over and returning to his quiet life. But then he thought about Ranger, about those children Amber would bring to visit, about the kind of man he wanted to be. "I'm in," he said. "Tell me what you need me to do." Ingrid drove into Pine Ridge on a Friday evening, meeting Clay at a turn-off 3 miles from the Halloran estate. She arrived in a nondescript sedan, carrying a backpack and a camera with a telephoto lens that looked professional. "We'll go in on foot," she said, spreading a map across the hood of her car. "Stay in the tree line here, observation point about 200 yards from the main outbuildings. Close enough to see, far enough to stay hidden." Clay's mouth was dry. "And if someone sees us?" "We run. But they won't. I've done this before." They parked both vehicles off the road, hidden in the trees, and started walking. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the woods. Ranger had stayed home. Clay couldn't risk bringing him close to a place that had likely caused his trauma. The walk took 20 minutes. Ingrid moved quietly, confidently. Clay tried to match her steps, feeling clumsy and exposed. His heart hammered in his chest. This was real now. Not just driving past, not just taking distant photos. This was active investigation of dangerous people. They reached the vantage point as darkness fell. Through a gap in the trees, Clay could see the estate clearly. The main house dark and abandoned, but lights on in the outbuildings. Several vehicles were already parked in a rough semicircle. Men stood around talking, smoking cigarettes. Ingrid set up the camera on a small tripod, adjusting the focus. "There," she whispered. "Take a look." Clay peered through the viewfinder. The telephoto lens brought everything into sharp detail. He could see faces, license plates, even the way the men moved. Casual, comfortable, like they had no fear of being caught. Then he heard the barking. Multiple dogs, the sounds aggressive and frightened. His stomach tightened. "They're warming them up," Ingrid whispered, "getting the dogs agitated before the fights." They stayed for 2 hours, documenting everything. Ingrid took hundreds of photos, vehicles, faces, the buildings, the pattern of activity. Clay felt sick watching it, but he forced himself to stay focused. This was evidence. This was how they'd stop it. Around 9 o'clock, they heard something that made Clay's blood run cold. A child's voice calling out. He couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a child. Ingrid adjusted the camera, searching. Then she froze. Oh no. Clay looked through the lens. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, was carrying buckets of water toward one of the outbuildings. Behind him, a younger girl, maybe 7 or 8, swept the ground near the entrance with a push broom. "They're using children," Clay breathed. "Family operation," Ingrid said grimly. "Happens more often than you'd think. Kids grow up in it, don't know any different." Clay watched the boy pour water into bowls, the girl finish sweeping, and disappear inside one of the buildings. His grandson Wyatt was 7, the same age as that little girl. The thought made him want to charge down there, but Ingrid's hand on his arm stopped him. "We document," she whispered firmly. "That's all. We can't help them by getting caught." They stayed another hour, taking more photos, watching the pattern of activity. Finally, Ingrid packed up the camera. We've got what we need. Let's go. The walk back felt longer. Clay's mind was racing, filled with images of those children, the sounds of the dogs, the casual cruelty of the men standing around like this was a normal Friday night. At the vehicles, Ingrid showed him some of the photos on the camera's display. This changes everything. With children involved, we need child protective services. FBI, maybe. This isn't just animal cruelty anymore. How long will that take? Building a case. Could be weeks. Could be months. Federal agencies move slowly. She saw his expression. I know it's hard. But if we move too fast, they'll scatter and set up somewhere else. We need to shut this down completely. Clay drove home feeling hollowed out. The house was quiet when he walked in. Ranger greeted him at the door, tail wagging, and Clay knelt down and held the dog close. I saw where you came from, he whispered into Ranger's fur. I saw what they're still doing. That night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those children. Wyatt's face superimposed over theirs. The thought that kids were being raised in that environment, taught that hurting animals was acceptable, maybe even normal. It was unbearable. Morning brought Amber's call confirming their visit. We'll drive up next Friday. Stay through the weekend. Wyatt's so excited to meet Ranger. I can't wait to see you both, Clay said, and meant it. But guilt nagged at him. What if something went wrong before then? What if his involvement in this investigation put him in danger? He pushed the thoughts away and tried to focus on normal life. Work at the community center, evening hours in the workshop, walking Ranger through the neighborhood. But everything felt like performance now, like he was playing at being normal, while his real life existed in those surveillance photos and encrypted messages on the burner phone. Doris noticed. She stopped by one afternoon with fresh bread and that knowing look grandmothers perfect over decades. Something's weighing on you, she said simply. Clay almost told her. The words were right there, but he remembered Ingrid's warning. Just trying to figure some things out, making decisions about the future. It wasn't entirely a lie. Well, whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone. You've got people who care about you now. Don't forget that. After she left, Clay sat on the porch with Ranger and thought about her words. For 3 years he'd been alone by choice, by habit, by the belief that he didn't deserve connection anymore. But somehow, in the past month, that had changed. He had Doris checking on him, Frank asking if he was okay, Amber planning visits, Irving stopping by to chat, even Beatrice pushing him to teach that carpentry class. He'd rebuilt something he hadn't realized was broken, a place in a community. People who noticed when he was troubled, people who cared. Over the next week, Ingrid made contact with her federal connections. An agent named Lowell Keegan was interested. He specialized in animal cruelty cases that crossed state lines. She arranged a meeting for all 3 of them at a coffee shop 2 counties over. Clay used the burner phone to document more activity at the Halloran estate. He varied his times, his routes, always careful to never establish a pattern that might be noticed. He saw the children twice more. Each time felt like a weight added to his chest. The burner phone buzzed one evening with a text from Ingrid. Meeting with Keegan set for Tuesday 2 p.m. Bring everything. Clay gathered his photos, his notes, the observations he'd written down after each surveillance session. He printed out the historical documents from the library, showing the property layout. It all went into a folder that he hid in his workshop, under a false bottom in his old toolbox. Tuesday came. Clay told Frank he had a doctor's appointment and left work early. The coffee shop was nearly empty when he arrived. Ingrid was already there, sitting with a man in his 40s wearing a polo shirt and khakis, trying to look casual, but carrying himself like law enforcement. "Clay, this is Agent Keegan, FBI." Keegan shook Clay's hand firmly. "Ingrid tells me you've done some impressive work." They spent 2 hours going through everything. Keegan asked detailed questions, took notes, examined the photos carefully. When Clay mentioned the children, Keegan's expression darkened. "That brings this to a whole different level. We'll need to coordinate with CPS, local sheriff, possibly ATF if there are weapons involved." He closed his notebook. "This is going to take time to do right. Maybe 3 weeks to get all the warrants, coordinate the agencies, plan the raid. 3 weeks?" Clay felt the weight of it. 3 more weeks of those dogs suffering, those children living in that environment. "I know it's hard," Keegan said, "but if we rush it, we risk them getting away. We need to be thorough." After the meeting, Clay sat in his truck in the parking lot, trying to process everything. 3 weeks. Amber and Wyatt would visit in 2 days. He'd have to maintain normalcy through that. Then wait another 2.5 weeks, while knowing exactly what was happening 15 miles from his house. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. These hands that had built furniture, fixed broken things, freed a dog from a trap. What else were they capable of? His phone, his regular phone, rang. It was Amber. "Hey Dad, we're packing now. Wyatt wants to know if Ranger likes to play fetch." Clay took a breath and let the sound of his daughter's voice ground him. "He's still learning, but I think he'd love playing with Wyatt. We'll see you Friday evening then. I'll be here, can't wait." He meant it. Whatever else was happening, whatever weight he was carrying, his family was coming home, and that mattered more than anything. Amber arrived Friday evening, just as the sun was setting, her sedan pulling into Clay's driveway, with Wyatt's face pressed against the back window. Clay was on the porch, Ranger sitting calmly beside him, and his heart lifted at the sight of them. Wyatt burst out of the car before Amber had fully stopped, running toward the porch. "Grandpa, where's the dog?" "Right here," Clay said, kneeling down. "But you need to approach slow and gentle. He's still learning to trust people." Wyatt slowed, his 7-year-old energy barely contained. He stopped a few feet from Ranger and held out his hand the way Clay had shown him over video chat. "Hi, Ranger. I'm Wyatt." Ranger sniffed the boy's hand, then his tail began to wag. Within minutes, they were sitting together on the porch, Wyatt gently petting Ranger's head while the dog leaned into the attention. Amber hugged Clay tight. "Look at this place, Dad. You've fixed it up." Clay glanced around, seeing his home through her eyes. The porch he'd repaired, the flower boxes he'd installed, the fresh paint on the trim. "Just keeping busy. It's more than that. You're different." She smiled. Better different. The weekend passed too quickly. Wyatt and Ranger were inseparable, playing in the backyard, napping together on the couch, taking walks around the neighborhood. Clay taught his grandson basic carpentry in the garage workshop, showing him how to sand wood smooth, how to measure carefully. "Will you build me something, Grandpa?" Wyatt asked, sawdust in his hair. "What would you like?" "A birdhouse, for my mum's garden." So they worked together, Clay guiding Wyatt's hands, feeling decades fall away as he remembered his own father teaching him the same skills. Ranger watched from his blanket, and Amber took photos from the doorway, her eyes bright with tears she didn't try to hide. Sunday evening, as they were packing to leave, Amber pulled Clay aside. "Whatever you're doing, this life you're building, don't stop. Wyatt hasn't stopped talking about you all weekend, and I haven't seen you this present in years. I'm trying to be better, for all of us." "You are better." She hugged him again, We'll come back next month. Maybe you could visit us too. I'd love that." After they left, the house felt emptier, but not lonely. Clay sat on the porch with Ranger, processing the weekend. He'd promised Wyatt he'd visit. He'd promised to keep building things with him. Those promises felt sacred, and they made what came next even more urgent. The burner phone buzzed. "Ingrid. Need to meet. Tonight if possible. Something new." Clay drove to their usual spot, a turnoff near the state forest. Ingrid was already there, pacing beside her car, agitation clear in her movements. "What's wrong?" "We got lucky. One of my contacts works with animal control in Thorndale. They picked up a dog yesterday, shepherd mix, young, injuries consistent with fighting. The dog had a microchip." "Okay." "The chip was registered to an address. Want to guess which one?" Clay's stomach dropped. "The Halloran estate." "Bingo. Which means we now have direct proof of illegal activity at that location. Better yet..." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. "They found this near where they caught the dog." It was a piece of paper, water-stained but readable. A child's drawing in crayon, dogs in cages, stick figures standing around. A building that looked like a barn. In the corner, written in careful block letters, "Lucy, age 8. Clay stared at the drawing. That little girl he'd seen through the camera lens. She'd drawn this. Maybe it had blown away from the property. Maybe she'd deliberately left it. He'd never know. But here it was, evidence of a child's presence at a place where no child should be. "This changes the timeline," Ingrid said. "Agent Keegan saw this photo an hour ago. He's pushing for the raid to happen this week. Wednesday night. 3 days from now? The microchip gives us probable cause. The drawing proves children are present. Keegan thinks we can fast-track the warrants. He's coordinating with Child Protective Services, local sheriff, and his own team." She looked at Clay seriously. "He wants to know if you want to be there, as a civilian observer. You started this investigation. You've earned the right." Clay thought about those children, about the dogs still suffering, about Ranger's scars and the promise he'd made to his grandson to visit next month. If something went wrong on Wednesday. But he also thought about what Doris had said, about not carrying things alone, about being part of something bigger than himself. "I'll be there. It's going to be intense. Multiple agencies, armed personnel, potential for resistance. You'll stay at the command post, away from the actual action. But still, I understand." They went over the plan. The raid would begin at dawn Wednesday, before the property woke up fully, while people were still disoriented. Clay's role would be minimal but important. Stay with the animal control team, help calm and assess the dogs once the site was secured. His experience with Ranger made him valuable for that. Monday and Tuesday passed in a blur of nervous energy. Clay went through the motions at work, but his mind was elsewhere. Frank finally cornered him Tuesday afternoon. "Whatever you've gotten yourself into, be careful." Clay looked up, surprised. "What makes you think?" "I've known you a year, Clay. You've been different these past weeks, distracted, purposeful but worried. I don't need to know the details. Just be careful. Whatever it is. I will." Tuesday night, Clay couldn't sleep. He wrote a letter to Amber. Not a goodbye exactly, but an explanation. He told her he was proud of her, proud of the mother she'd become, grateful for the chance to know his grandson. He told her about Ranger, about how saving one dog had led him back to himself. He didn't mention the raid, but he wrote the letter as if he might not get another chance. He sealed it in an envelope and left it in his desk drawer, just in case. At 3 in the morning, he sat on the floor next to Ranger's bed, his hand resting on the dog's side. "Tomorrow we're going to help the others," he whispered. "The ones who weren't as lucky as you. The ones still trapped in that place." Ranger's tail thumped softly against the floor. Clay thought about the path that had led him here, from stopping on that back road to sitting in the dark before dawn, preparing to help raid a criminal operation. It seemed impossible. A month ago, he'd been going through life like a ghost. Now he was more alive than he'd been in years, and more frightened. But fear meant something was at stake. And for the first time in a long time, Clay had things worth protecting. Not just Ranger, but the life he was rebuilding, the relationships he was repairing, the person he was becoming. He pulled out the child's drawing that Ingrid had copied for him. Lucy, age 8. In a few hours, she'd be safe. Those dogs would be safe. And the people running that operation would face justice. Clay pinned the drawing to his workshop wall, next to the photo of the Halloran estate in its prime. A reminder of what had been lost, what could still be saved. He tried to sleep for a few hours, but mostly just lay in bed watching the ceiling, listening to Ranger breathe in the next room. At 5 o'clock, he gave up and made coffee. At 5:30, he showered and dressed in dark, practical clothes, as Ingrid had instructed. At 6 o'clock, the burner phone buzzed. "Staging area in 30 minutes. Let's finish this." Clay knelt beside Ranger one more time. "I'll be back soon. Be good." Then he walked out into the pre-dawn darkness toward something he'd never imagined himself doing, carrying a sense of purpose that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. The staging area was an abandoned farm 3 miles from the Halloran estate. When Clay arrived in the grey pre-dawn light, the place was already organized chaos. Multiple vehicles parked in careful formation, FBI sedans, county sheriff SUVs, animal control vans, 2 ambulances standing by. Personnel moved with quiet efficiency, checking equipment, studying maps, speaking in low voices. Clay parked where Ingrid had instructed and walked toward the largest group. He felt immediately out of place among the law enforcement officers in tactical gear, but Ingrid spotted him and waved him over. "Clay, you remember Agent Keegan?" The FBI agent shook his hand. "Glad you're here. Your documentation made this possible." He gestured to a folding table covered with maps and photographs, many of them Clay's surveillance pictures. "We've got 17 personnel going in. Primary objective is securing the children safely. Secondary is detaining suspects and documenting evidence. Third is animal rescue." Clay nodded, trying to absorb the information being delivered rapid fire. "You'll stay here at command with animal control," Keegan continued. "Once we give the all clear, you'll go in with their team. Your job is helping assess and calm the dogs. Ingrid says you're good with traumatized animals." "I've worked with one," Clay said. "I'm not an expert." "You're more qualified than most." Keegan pulled out a radio. "You'll monitor on this. Channel 3. Listen, but don't transmit unless there's an emergency." A woman approached, mid-30s, wearing an animal control uniform with Jackson County across the back. "I'm Cora Chen, Animal Control Supervisor. You're the civilian consultant?" "Clay Harmon." "Ingrid vouches for you, so that's good enough for me. When we get the call, we go in with protective equipment. Some of these dogs might be aggressive. Most will be terrified. We move slow, we speak soft, we don't force anything. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." The sky was lightening. Someone handed Clay a vest marked Civilian Observer. He put it on, feeling the weight of it, both physical and symbolic. Around him, teams were doing final checks: weapons, communication equipment, medical supplies. Sheriff Boyd Hutchins approached the command table. Clay recognized him from his visit to the sheriff's office weeks ago. Hutchins looked tired but determined. "We've got Child Protective Services standing by," he said to Keegan. "2 social workers ready to take custody of the minors. Medical personnel briefed on what they might encounter." Keegan nodded. "Tactical team ready?" "Standing by." Clay's heart was hammering. He pressed the radio to his ear as Keegan began the final briefing. "We have warrants for the property and for arrest of anyone on site. Intelligence suggests 2 to 4 adults present, possibly armed, 2 confirmed minors, unknown number of animals." Keegan's voice was calm, professional. "Rules of engagement: secure the children first. Use minimum necessary force. We want everyone out alive and in custody." Teams moved to their vehicles. Clay stayed at the command post with Cora and 2 other animal control officers. They watched as the tactical vehicles pulled out in formation, heading toward the Halloran estate. Ingrid stood beside Clay, binoculars raised. "This is it, everything we've worked for." The radio crackled. "All units moving into position." Clay's hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets and tried to breathe evenly. More radio chatter. "Team 1 in position. South approach clear. Team 2 ready. North perimeter secure. Team 3 holding. Main entrance covered." The dawn was fully breaking now, soft light spreading across the rural landscape. Birds were singing, indifferent to the human drama unfolding. Then Keegan's voice. "All teams, execute, go, go, go." The radio exploded with voices overlapping, movement reports, confirmations, the sounds of vehicles and shouting. Clay strained to understand what was happening. "Main building breached. 2 suspects in custody. South outbuilding. Children located. Repeat, children located. 2 minors, ages approximately 8 and 11. Securing now." Clay felt tears prick his eyes. The children were safe. Lucy and the boy. They were safe. More reports flooded in. Additional suspect detained. No resistance. Outbuilding 2 secure. Multiple animals present. Outbuilding 3, we need animal control. At least 20 dogs here. Cora was already moving toward the van. "That's our cue. Let's go." Clay climbed into the passenger seat, his legs feeling weak. The drive to the estate took 5 minutes, but felt longer. As they pulled up the gravel drive, Clay saw it all clearly for the first time in daylight. The Victorian mansion, decrepit and hollow. The outbuildings, old stables converted into something dark. Law enforcement vehicles everywhere. People in custody sitting on the ground, hands secured behind them. And then he saw the children, a boy and a girl, wrapped in blankets, being led to an ambulance by 2 women in professional clothes, the CPS social workers. The girl was crying. The boy looked shell-shocked, empty. As Clay watched, the boy's eyes met his across the distance. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or just the acknowledgement that someone had seen them, had cared enough to help. Then they were in the ambulance, and the doors closed, and they were gone towards safety and evaluation and hopefully healing. "Mr. Harmon!" Cora was waiting. "We need you." Clay followed her toward the outbuildings. The smell hit him first, waste and fear, and something metallic he realized was blood. Inside the first building, cages lined the walls, dogs in various states of distress, some barking frantically, others cowering silently, a few too injured to do more than lie still. "We need to assess each one," Cora said, pulling on heavy gloves. "Determine who needs immediate medical attention, who's safe to transport, who might be aggressive." Clay moved to the first cage, a pit bull, scarred and trembling. He knelt down slowly, speaking in the same soft voice he'd used with Ranger. "Hey there. Hey, it's okay now. You're safe." The dog's ears flicked toward his voice. Clay opened the cage carefully, letting the dog come to him instead of reaching in. After a long moment, the dog crawled forward and pressed against Clay's legs. "This one's scared but not aggressive," Clay said. "Needs medical care but safe to handle." They worked through the building methodically. Some dogs snarled and snapped, fear turning to aggression. Those required sedation before transport. Others were docile, broken by what they'd endured. A few, like the pit bull, just needed gentle handling and a kind voice. In the second building, they found more. Clay lost count. 20 dogs, 30, maybe more. Each one catalogued, assessed, prepared for transport to emergency veterinary facilities. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Clay's back ached from kneeling. His voice was hoarse from talking softly to frightened animals. His heart was breaking with every scarred face he encountered. But they were saving them. Every single one. In the third building, the one farthest from the house, Clay found something that stopped him cold. A cage in the corner, smaller than the others. Inside was a collar, old, blood-stained, with a name scratched into the metal tag. Ranger. His Ranger. This was where he'd been kept before he'd escaped, before he'd ended up in that trap, before Clay had found him. Clay picked up the collar with shaking hands. Agent Keegan appeared beside him. "We're cataloguing all evidence. That'll need to be photographed and logged. This belonged to my dog, the one I rescued. This is where he came from." Keegan's expression softened. "Then you did exactly what you set out to do. You found where he came from, and you shut it down." Clay nodded, unable to speak. He handed the collar to Keegan, but took a photo of it first, evidence of a different kind, proof of a journey that had led him here. By noon, the last of the dogs had been loaded into transport vehicles. Clay stood in the yard of the Halloran estate, exhausted and covered in dirt and dog hair, watching the convoy prepare to leave. Cora approached with a bottle of water. "You did good work today," she said. "Real good. Most of these dogs wouldn't have been handled as well without you." Clay drank the water gratefully. His voice was nearly gone from hours of soft talking to frightened animals. "How many total?" 37 dogs. 12 need immediate surgery. Another 20 need extensive medical care. The rest are in better shape, but all traumatized. She paused. Could have been a lot worse. We got here before whatever they had planned for tonight. Clay thought about that. If they'd waited another week, another month, how many more would have suffered? How many wouldn't have survived? Agent Keegan walked over, removing his tactical vest. "We've got 4 adults in custody. Property owner and 3 associates. Found evidence of organized fighting going back at least 18 months. Financial records, betting logs, videos on phones." His expression was grim. More than enough to put them away for a long time. "The children?" Clay asked. "With CPS, they're being evaluated at the hospital. Both have family, an aunt in Knoxville who's been trying to get custody for 2 years, but couldn't prove the environment was dangerous. She'll probably get them now." "They were just living here? In this?" "The boy and girl are siblings. Their father owned the property, ran the operation. Mother left years ago." Keegan shook his head. "Kids didn't go to school. Completely isolated. They thought this was normal life." Clay felt sick. He thought about Wyatt, about the childhood every kid deserved. These 2 had been robbed of that, raised in violence and cruelty. "Can I see where they lived?" Keegan hesitated, then nodded. "Come on." They walked to the main house. Inside, the decay was worse. Water damage, mold, holes in the floor. But in 2 rooms upstairs, there were signs of children trying to create normalcy. The girls' room had drawings taped to the walls, flowers, houses, dogs, happy images that contradicted everything happening below. The boys' room was sparse, but had a shelf of books, all dog-eared and well-read. On the girl's desk, Clay found more drawings. All of them featured dogs. In most, the dogs looked sad. But in one recent drawing, a dog was running free, surrounded by flowers and sunshine. "Can I take this?" Clay asked, holding up the drawing. "It's evidence, but I'll make sure you get a copy." They walked back outside. The property was emptying now. Suspects transported to county jail, dogs on their way to veterinary care, evidence teams finishing documentation. The place would be sealed, investigated thoroughly, then eventually demolished or sold. In the daylight, with the horror removed, it was just an old farm. Buildings that had once housed horses, now empty. Fields that could have grown crops lying fallow. So much wasted potential, turned toward cruelty. Ingrid found Clay sitting on the tailgate of an animal control truck. She looked as exhausted as he felt. "We did it," she said simply. "We did. I've been doing this work for 8 years. This is the biggest operation I've helped shut down. The most dogs rescued at once." She looked at the estate. None of it would have happened if you hadn't stopped for one dog on a back road. Clay thought about that moment, seeing Ranger in the trap, making the choice to help. How that single decision had led to this chain of events. 37 dogs saved, 2 children removed from an abusive situation, 4 criminals arrested. "I just couldn't leave him there," Clay said quietly. "That's what makes you different from most people. You saw suffering and you stopped." Sheriff Hutchins approached, removing his hat. "Mr. Harmon, I owe you an apology. When you came to my office asking about animal cruelty, I dismissed you. Told you to leave it to the professionals. I was wrong. You had limited resources. I had excuses. You had compassion and determination. That made the difference." He extended his hand. "Thank you for not listening to me." Clay shook his hand, too tired to form a proper response. As the afternoon wore on, Clay helped load the last pieces of equipment. His phone, his regular phone, buzzed with a text from Doris. "Haven't seen you today. Everything okay?" He typed back, "Long day. I'm fine. Home soon." How could he explain where he'd been, what he'd done? The woman who brought him casseroles and worried about him living alone had no idea he'd been part of shutting down a criminal operation. Agent Keegan approached one final time. "The U.S. Attorney will want statements from you and Ingrid, probably next week. These cases take time to prosecute, but with the evidence we have, they'll all plead out or go to prison. What about the children's father? Facing the most serious charges, animal cruelty, child endangerment, operating an illegal gambling enterprise. He won't see freedom for a very long time." Clay nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. "One more thing," Keegan said. He held out the collar, Ranger's original collar, now sealed in an evidence bag. "We've photographed and documented it. When the trial's over, you can have it back. Figured you might want it." Clay took the bag, seeing Ranger's name scratched into the metal. "Thank you." As he drove home, the sun was setting. The same Tuesday-turned-Wednesday dawn had stretched into a full day of exhausting, necessary work. Clay's body ached. His mind felt scraped raw. But underneath the exhaustion was something else, a sense of completion, of purpose fulfilled. He pulled into his driveway as darkness fell. The house lights were on. He'd left them that way for Ranger. Through the window he could see the dog's silhouette, waiting. Clay sat in the truck for a moment, looking at his small rental house. A month ago, it had been just a place to sleep, to pass time, to exist without living. Now it was home, a place where he'd rebuilt himself, found purpose, reconnected with family. All because of one decision to stop on a back road. He got out of the truck, carrying the evidence bag with Ranger's collar, and walked toward the door, toward the dog who'd saved him by letting himself be saved, toward the life he was learning to live again. The door opened before he reached it. He'd left it unlocked. Ranger stood there, tail wagging, whole and healed and free. "Hey, boy," Clay said, his voice breaking. "We did it. We helped the others." Ranger pressed against his legs as Clay knelt down, and for a long moment, man and dog just held on to each other in the doorway, both understanding what the other had survived. Clay slept for 12 hours straight. When he woke Thursday afternoon, Ranger was on the bed beside him, something the dog had never done before. Clay's hand found Ranger's fur, and they lay there together in the quiet afternoon light. His phone showed missed calls from Frank, from Doris, from Amber. He'd deal with those later. First, he needed to process what had happened, let his mind catch up to his body. He showered, made coffee, and sat on the porch. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as always. Kids riding bikes, neighbors mowing lawns, the ordinary rhythm of small-town life. But Clay felt fundamentally changed by what he'd witnessed and done. His phone rang. Ingrid. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Still processing." "Yeah, me too. I wanted you to know. I got word from the veterinary teams. All 37 dogs are stabilized. 3 needed emergency surgery, but they're going to make it. The rest are responding to treatment." Clay felt tension he didn't know he was carrying release from his shoulders. "That's good. That's really good." Agent Keegan called. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is fast-tracking the prosecution. With the evidence we gathered, the videos on their phones alone, they're expecting all 4 to accept plea deals within a month." "What about the children?" "Their aunt got emergency custody this morning. She's been trying to get them for years. Now she finally can." Ingrid paused. "Clay, what you did, starting from nothing, just one rescued dog. It's remarkable. Most people would have stopped at saving Ranger." "I couldn't. Once I knew—" "I know. That's what makes you different." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to keep doing this work. There are other operations out there. Would you want to help with surveillance when needed? No pressure, but you're good at it." Clay thought about the fear, the sleepless nights, the weight of knowing what was happening. But he also thought about those 37 dogs now getting medical care, about Lucy and her brother safe with family who loved them. "Let me think about it," he said. "Right now, I just need to be still for a while." "Fair enough. Call me if you need anything." After they hung up, Clay went to his workshop. The space felt different now. Not just a place he'd rediscovered, but a sanctuary he'd earned. He found the copy of Lucy's drawing that Agent Keegan had given him before he left. The one with the dog running free through flowers. He pinned it on the wall next to the historical photo of the Halloran estate. Past and future, destruction and hope, all hanging there together. Frank stopped by that evening, carrying a 6-pack of root beer. "Figured you might need company," he said, settling into a porch chair. "You going to tell me where you disappeared to?" Clay hesitated, then told him. Not everything, but enough. Finding Ranger, discovering where he came from, working with Ingrid and the FBI, the raid yesterday. Frank listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious. "That's why you've been distracted," Frank finally said. "You were hunting down criminals." "I was trying to help some dogs." "You did more than that. You did something most people wouldn't have the courage to do." Frank opened 2 root beers, handed one to Clay. "I'm proud of you. Worried, but proud." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set. Ranger lay between them, content. "The community center board met today," Frank said eventually. "They want to offer you the carpentry class, teaching basic woodworking, starting next month. Beatrice has been pestering them about it. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You built a whole case against criminals. I think you can handle teaching people to use a table saw." Frank smiled. "Think about it. No pressure." After Frank left, Clay called Amber. He kept the story simple. He'd been helping with an animal rescue situation. It had taken up more time than expected. But it was resolved now. "Are you okay, Dad? You sound exhausted." "I am, but I'm fine. Wyatt's been showing everyone at school the birdhouse you two built together. His teacher wants to know if you'd video chat with the class about carpentry." She laughed. "My dad, the celebrity craftsman." Clay smiled despite his exhaustion. "Tell his teacher I'd be happy to." They talked for another hour, easy conversation about nothing important and everything that mattered. Amber's job, Wyatt's soccer team, plans for Thanksgiving. Normal family talk that felt precious after the past few days. Friday morning, Agent Keegan called with an update. All 4 suspects had been formally charged. The children's father was being held without bail. The property had been seized as evidence and would eventually be sold, with proceeds going to animal welfare organizations. "One more thing," Keegan said. "We found records going back 3 years. Your dog, Ranger, he was reported stolen from a family in Kentucky 2 years ago. They'd been looking for him ever since." Clay's heart sank. "They want him back. I contacted them. They said—" Keegan paused. "They said any dog that survived what he survived deserves to stay with whoever saved him. They're just grateful to know he's alive and safe." Clay looked at Ranger, who was watching him with those intelligent, trusting eyes. "Thank you for telling me." That afternoon, Clay drove to Dr. Brennan's clinic for Ranger's follow-up appointment. The leg had healed well, the infections cleared, the scars fading. "He looks wonderful," Dr. Brennan said, examining him. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I heard you connected Ingrid and me, started this whole thing." She smiled. "I just introduced 2 people who cared. You did the rest." As Clay was leaving, Dr. Brennan called after him. "The dogs from the raid, several are going to need foster homes during recovery. Would you consider taking one temporarily?" Clay thought about his small house, his quiet life, the peace he'd only just found. Then he thought about Ranger, about second chances, about how helping one had led to helping many. "Let me think about it," he said. "But probably yes." Driving home, Ranger in the passenger seat with his head out the window, Clay felt something settle in his chest. Not quite peace. The memories of what he'd seen were too fresh for that. But purpose, direction, the sense that his life meant something again. He'd stopped on a back road for one suffering creature. That choice had rippled outward in ways he never could have imagined, touching dozens of lives, animal and human both. And it wasn't over. It was just beginning. 3 months later, Clay stood in his workshop on a crisp November morning, running his hand along a piece of walnut he'd been shaping into a jewelry box. Ranger lay on his blanket in the corner, no longer the frightened, wounded animal from that summer day. The dog was healthy, confident, at peace. The workshop had changed, too. A new sign hung outside, Harmon and Son Carpentry. Clay had made it himself, the letters carefully routed and painted. The Son was for Wyatt, though his grandson was too young to be a real partner. But it felt right, leaving the door open for possibilities, for family, for a future that included more than just himself. Orders had been steady since he'd started taking commissions again. Nothing fancy. Cutting boards, small furniture pieces, repairs. Word spread in a small town, and people remembered that Clay Harmon used to be a fine carpenter before he'd lost his way for a while. The carpentry class at the community center met Tuesday and Thursday evenings. 8 students, ranging from a teenager to a retired pharmacist. Clay had been nervous teaching that first session, but Frank's encouragement and Beatrice's enthusiasm had carried him through. Now, 2 months in, he actually looked forward to it. There was satisfaction in passing on skills his father had taught him. A car pulled into the driveway. Clay looked up to see Amber's sedan, right on schedule. She and Wyatt had started visiting every other weekend, the distance between them shrinking with each trip. Wyatt burst into the workshop, older somehow than he'd been just 2 weeks ago. "Grandpa, can we work on my project?" They'd started building a bookshelf for Wyatt's room, a real project that would take months, teaching the boy patience and precision. Clay pulled out the pieces they'd cut last visit. "Let's see if you remember how to check if it's square," Clay said, handing Wyatt the framing square. Amber appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand. "Morning, Dad. Place looks good." She was right. The rental house had transformed over the months. Fresh paint, a small garden Doris had helped him plant, repairs he'd been putting off for years finally completed. It looked like someone lived here instead of just existed. "How's work?" Clay asked as they supervised Wyatt's careful measurements. "Busy, good busy." She paused. "I got an offer from a medical practice in Murfreesboro, closer to you. Only 40 minutes instead of 2 hours. Clay looked up. "Yeah?" "I'm thinking about it. Wyatt would be closer to his grandfather. And to Ranger," she smiled. "Seems like we've got reasons to be around more." After lunch, they drove to the community center. Clay had something he wanted to show them. In the main hallway, a new display case held photographs from the Halloran estate raid, carefully selected images that showed the rescue without the brutality. 37 dogs saved, 2 children removed from danger, a community coming together for justice. "That's you, Grandpa?" Wyatt asked, pointing to a photo of Clay kneeling beside a frightened pit bull. "That's me." "You saved all those dogs?" "A lot of people saved them. I just helped." But the plaque below the photos told a different story. Through the dedication of community members and law enforcement, this operation was shut down. Special recognition to Clay Harmon, whose investigation began with rescuing a single dog and led to justice for many. Amber read the plaque, her eyes shining. "Dad, this is incredible." Clay felt embarrassed by the attention, but also quietly proud. He'd done something that mattered, something that would outlast him. Irving stopped by while they were there, shaking Clay's hand firmly. "Whole town's talking about what you did. You're a hero." "I'm not." "You are. Don't argue with a postal worker. We know things." Irving grinned and moved on. That evening, after Amber and Wyatt left with promises to return in 2 weeks, Clay sat on his porch with Ranger. Doris came by with cookies. She always seemed to know when he needed company. "You've had quite a year," she said, settling into the other chair. "It's been something. I told you that you were too young to live like an old man. Guess you finally listened." She reached down to pet Ranger. "This dog changed your life." "We changed each other's." They sat in comfortable silence until Doris went home. Clay remained on the porch as the sun set, Ranger's head resting on his knee. He thought about the journey, from that back road in July to this November evening, from isolation to connection, from purposelessness to meaning. His phone buzzed, a text from Ingrid. "Update on the dogs, all 37 placed in permanent homes. Thought you'd want to know." Clay replied, "Best news I've heard all week." Another text came through, this one from Amber. "Wyatt wants me to tell you he had the best day. Also, I'm seriously considering the Murfreesboro job. We'll talk soon." Clay set the phone down and looked at Ranger. "You hear that, boy? They might move closer." Ranger's tail thumped against the porch. Inside, Clay found the evidence bag containing Ranger's original collar, returned to him after the trial concluded. All 4 defendants had pleaded guilty. The ringleader got 15 years. The others got sentences ranging from 5 to 10. The children were thriving with their aunt in Knoxville, getting therapy, attending school for the first time, learning what normal childhood looked like. Clay held the collar for a moment, then placed it in his desk drawer next to his wedding band. Both were artifacts from painful pasts, Ranger's and his own. Both were reminders of survival, of moving forward, of choosing to heal. He returned to the porch, to the dog who'd given him a reason to stop on a back road, to get involved, to care about something beyond his own quiet suffering. Sometimes the loneliest people understand suffering better than anyone else, Clay said softly, repeating the words that had become his truth. And sometimes, one simple choice to stop when everyone else keeps driving can change 2 lives forever. Ranger looked up at him with those dark, knowing eyes. I stopped that day, Clay continued, and everything changed. Not because I was special, or brave, or knew what I was doing. I stopped because I recognized something in your eyes, the same thing I saw in my own mirror every morning, the need to be seen, to matter, to be worth saving. He scratched behind Ranger's ears, feeling the solid warmth of the dog against his leg. Turns out, we saved each other. And if an old man and a broken dog can find their way back... Clay looked out at the quiet street, the peaceful neighborhood, the life he'd rebuilt one day at a time. Well, maybe there's hope for all of us. Ranger's tail thumped in agreement. They sat together as darkness fell, 2 souls who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion create the biggest changes. That stopping when others pass by matters. That choosing connection over isolation, action over despair, hope over resignation, that's how lives are rebuilt. One choice, one dog, one back road on a summer afternoon. Everything else followed from there.